All right, I want to talk about this. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Superheroes Speak. I'm your host, Dave. This is another rant, more or less. It's just something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I think people need to consider this when they start talking about certain things. And of course, that's Comic Con, and the MCU. And I think some people might think this is a stretch, but not at all. So let me give you a little background on what I'm talking about here. So the thought experiment is, if the MCU dies, will it kill off Comic Con? And we talked about this on the show, I think a couple years ago, because the pandemic hit in 2020. Everyone knows this, and the it caused a lot of things to get shut down that year. I mean, first time ever, San Diego Comic Con shut down. New York Comic Con was gone, and a lot of conventions actually ended up dying. They didn't make it back out after the pandemic. They didn't start up again. Of course, San Diego and New York did. They're the two biggest conventions in the United States, so they still had plenty of money to continue on. So that's an important factor. But I also want you to let's talk about the two conventions real quick. San Diego, obviously the most famous and the largest convention in the United States, began in 1970 with 75 people, and it was in the basement of a hotel. Like, it's people who go to San Diego Comic Con now have no concept of where it came from and where it is. And it finally reached 50,000 attendees. I want to say, I believe it's 2001. All this information is actually available on Wiki. You can look it up if you want. And within the since 2001, they've tripled their attendance. So in 23 years, they went from 50,000 to 150,000 at last year. Um, and when you look at the numbers throughout the decades, they would jump maybe 1,000 a year, maybe 2,000 here and there. Like, the word spread. It was a word of mouth thing, but all of a sudden they they grew in leaps and bounds since the early 2000s. And then New York Comic Con, something that people don't know. I think a lot of people assume New York Comic Con's been around almost as long, but no, the official New York Comic Con that we all know today actually didn't start till what is it, 2006. And it's been around for 18 years. And when it started, its first show, let's see, actually 33,000 is where it started. And anyone who has been to were at those early ones. I actually have a couple friends that where I didn't start going to New York till um I want to say 12 years ago. Uh the first New York Comic Con was just in one hall at the Jacob Javits Center. Now it takes over the entire center. And it's huge. It's almost as big as San Diego. I mean, some actually a couple years they rivaled their numbers. So this is an important thing to keep in mind, that both these conventions grew tremendously in the last couple decades. And it's not, let's be honest, it is not at all that all of a sudden an interest in comic books exploded in the last 2 decades. No. What happened? We all know what happened. 2000, we get X-Men. Uh, 2002, we get Spider-Man, and uh, especially the Spider-Man movies, the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies exploded. They were the biggest superhero movies of the time. I mean, they made numbers that that shocked people tremendously, which stirred an interest in going to conventions. But let me take it back a step and tell you about my personal experience. I started going to comic book conventions in 1999, and the I remember the early conventions. It was Wizard World back then in Philly, and you would go in, and it was it was big to me, right? Because I'd never been to something like that. The other conventions I had been to prior to that, I had been to 2 Star Trek conventions, and, um, compared to what I saw in Philly, this was 3, 4 times the size of that. So I was shocked and amazed, and I really enjoyed it. I remember standing in line for a couple things, and, like, you stand in line and you meet people that have the same interests as you, and you automatically start talking about stuff, and it was like a cool place to hang out. You felt like, oh, this is home, this is where I belong, right? and and it was great. And then I want to say within 3 years, maybe 4 years, that convention started to really grow. And when you were at those early conventions, and I'm not trying to disparage anyone, but you would get Star Wars actors like Tom Baker. Is it Tom Baker? No, it's not Tom Baker. Okay, you would get uh, Peter Mayhew and uh, the guy who was in the Boba Fett suit. I can't think of his name. And then the guy who was in who was R2, right? Like you wouldn't even get Anthony Daniels. Like these were the biggest Star Wars people you would get, and then you had um, lots of wrestlers. You still get some wrestlers at conventions, but like half of the celebrities that were there were wrestlers, and then you had um, supporting cast people from things like Xena and whatnot. Like very rarely was there any kind of a big name at conventions, right? Especially local conventions like Wizard World Philly and the likes. And then the it exploded, right? The conventions started attracting more people because the movies came out and they became more popular. And it got people interested in like, oh, let me go check out a comic book convention. When they started getting big and they were making money, then they were able to say, hey, let's get Chris Hemsworth. Let's get um I don't know if I've ever been to a convention where Robert Downey Jr. was there, but I know I've met Chris Hemsworth. I've met basically the entire cast of The Next Generation, Star Trek: The Next Generation. I've met um, William Shatner and a bunch of people, and that's the thing. Like they became money makers for celebrities to actually come and meet their fans, and they were making I wouldn't say buku bucks, but they were making good money at these conventions. And because they got the celebrities in, everyone started coming in, and the normies came in, and it became more and more popular. And I mean, my personal opinion, and no offense to anyone watching this, but when it started attracting more normies, the conventions really started to that sense of family and camaraderie started going down. And I hear you. I hear JD too, and our former co-host Ben saying, "Oh, the more the merrier." But no, because I mean, it is going to sound silly, but like because they started becoming bigger and more popular, they started having places that served alcohol. And I remember being at a convention, and I was working for an artist at the time at their table, and I'm standing at the table, and I see these guys walking down the aisle, and all you could only describe them as dude bros. They each have a beer in their hand, and they're walking down, and they're looking at all the art and going, "I could do that. Oh, that was done on a computer. Oh, that's." And if you're not there to meet artists and writers of these comic books that are based on things that you like, or the things you like are based on them, and you're just going to critique people that you don't even know who they are, right? Like I saw them saying stuff about some really famous artists walking around Artist Alley, and that's what you're gonna do because you're a dude, bro, and you think mocking it is cool or funny somehow, and it ruins the experience for a lot of people. It really does, because again, if you're a nerd and you spent your life being bullied and then learning to avoid them, people like that, and then they show up at a convention, why are you there, right? And there's other things that have grown out of conventions. There are people who are professional cosplayers now who come to the conventions and make money, and I'm not gonna disparage people for doing that, it's like, it's fun, like, people just like to dress up as the characters they love, right? So it's a whole thing. And another aspect is these conventions, especially New York and San Diego, got so big that the cities that they're hosted in expanded the convention centers that they're in. The the Jacob Javits Center, like, started expanding right before the pandemic hit, and they have a whole new huge building, and it has these huge, halls in it, and they were doing that to compete with San Diego's Hall H because they wanted a big place where things could be shown and they could scoop things and attract more people that way. I mean, that's another aspect, right? Like, as these movies became big business, the companies would start sending people out, especially to San Diego's where it started, and they would have exclusives like, here's it's a panel with the whole cast of the new Iron Man movie or the new Avengers movie, and then Kevin Feige stands up there and shows an exclusive clip to the fans there, before the movie comes out, to build excitement to get people to go to these shows. And when the pandemic hit and people weren't going because the convention, they did these virtual events, um, and they still got the buzz they wanted. But I also think they are missing out on the point that these movies were already, well, number one, no one's going to the movies, but like if they didn't go the next year, these movies weren't making so much, or were so big and so popular. Like they could take a year or two off from advertising, heavily trying to build buzz because they had buzz already. And they did, like, and then they got this concept like we don't need the conventions. I mean, in fact, DC did a virtual convention for a couple years, even when the pandemic was done. They still did it a couple times, and their arguments, their thought process on as well. We can create the buzz ourselves. We don't need to go to San Diego, spend the money to send people out there, or New York, send people and take the time and effort to put together big presentations. We're just gonna do it virtually. Disney started having the Marvel stuff be introduced at the D23, which they do every other year, and um, because I mean their argument is why spend the money to do that at New York or San Diego when we can do it ourselves, and we're not, you know, we don't have to put out as much money. And from a business standpoint, I get it, but it sucks, right? So they're not. I will see what happens this year. I'm actually going to a convention tomorrow as you're watching this. It's the great Fan Expo Philly, which is run by a new company. It used to be Wizard. Half the staff is still people from that worked for Wizard, but it's new and it's different. And they're actually having a fair amount of large names there this year, so I'm kind of excited to go and try to get some interviews. But aside from that, uh, the list since the convention, that since the pandemic, um, and after Wizard got bought, the it hasn't been as exciting. It's not as big. New York is still big and exciting and fun, but this isn't. All right, so here's where I'm going with this, and I've been babbling for a while now, but people keep saying over and over again, the MCU is dead. They had one movie that failed last year, which is the Marvels. We all know that at this point, and there's a Spider-Man adjacent movie that came out earlier this year Madam Web that failed, but the average person doesn't separate the Sony-made Spider-Man adjacent movies from the Marvel movies, right? So they're hurting, and it's one of the reasons people are saying Marvel movies are dead, and part of what's going on now is they took a step back. Marvel took a step back and is like, well, we've inundated people with so much content. People are get souring on it. So let's just release one movie. It's going to be one of the largest movies of the MCU, which is Wolverine, Deadpool. But that's all that's coming out this year. So people aren't thinking about it. And there is a known expression, and that is okay. Hold on, let me say this another way. There's a known tactic that's done in politics. You know, I don't like talking politics, but this is a known tactic where people will start saying early on. They would get people to start saying, "Oh, this election's already over. This candidate lost." And believe it or not, it's been proven to work at times. Like, because if people think my candidate already lost, they're not going to bother to go out to vote, which hurts. But and it's a sad truth of humanity. Like, if you believe you've already lost, you're not going to go. So with all these people on social media and all these websites saying stuff like the MCU is dead, then and they're having all these issues and blah blah blah, people will start thinking, well then maybe I shouldn't go to these movies. Self-fulfilling prophecy, that's the term I was trying to think of. Maybe I won't go to these movies, right? Which could then you're saying there that it's dead, and people might not go to the movies because, "Oh, the MCU's dead, why am I gonna bother going?" Like, that's a real danger here, and then if the MCU does die off, and I'm not saying it's going to, I think they're changing course right now, and I think it's gonna get better, but if people stop going to the MCU movies, they stop making money, the MCU dies. We don't know what the DCU is gonna be like yet. I believe James Gunn is an excellent filmmaker, and with him in charge, I believe it'll be good, but we don't know yet. So the MCU dies. They're not making movies. They're not sending out A-list stars to these conventions, and the average comic book fan doesn't care about some of the other stars they get to go to these. I mean, I've seen it quite a few times now where the stars of The Office are going to comic book conventions. What? It doesn't make sense. And so if the big stars don't go, the attendance will start dropping down. And I'm not saying the conventions are going to die completely. I'm not saying that right now. What I'm saying is they will shrink. They will become hopefully they will become what they were in early 2000s where you get 50,000 people at these conventions and um at the big 2 and they'll shrink down. Does it hurt New York and San Diego? Yeah, because it's not going to draw the same kind of business. Does it hurt small conventions? Yeah, because if if they lose half the attendance they have now, they'll die. Like, it's true. The people don't realize that these conventions have a I want to say shoestring budget, but they have some of these conventions have a very tight budget. They don't make as much money as you think. Like, they make money, but there's the cost of the hall. There's the cost. They have employees that walk around these conventions. It's the cost of planning the convention. It's the cost of paying for guests. They pay to fly them in. They pay for their hotels and sometimes transportation back and forth from the convention center. Like, there's a lot of cost to opening a convention, and um, there was a Reed who does New York Comic Con started a convention in Philly uh, a few years ago called uh, Keystone Comic Con because Pennsylvania is the Keystone State, and they want they had two of them, and they did okay attendance wise, but it's hard to start a convention and it's hard to get timing was bad. It was after the pandemic and all that. I get it. Um, it's hard to draw people into a new convention. I get that too. Advertising isn't well, it's all cracked up to be anymore. So, long story short, it only lasted a couple years. They've said they're going to try to do it again, but like Keystone, I mean, R- uh, Reed Pop has been doing a lot of other conventions that do really well. I mean, New York Comic Con is the best example. So, why they can't get convention to work in New York, where Wizard's been here for 25 years, and they're able to keep going. I mean, again, it's a different company now, but it's a lot of the same people, so they know how to make it work. So I and I just I fear that it's going to hurt a lot of little businesses, but I also like I don't know. Like part of me thinks we'll get to a point where all these little conventions that have popped up over the last 20 years, some of them have already died, some more are going to die. And then where does that leave everything? Is it secular? Will a new movies come out and make money and then people start going back to the conventions? Or is it just going to go back to the way it was? Curious. I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen. Um, I think it's going to stay this way at least for a little while because with the DCU coming out, there'll be new buzz around all of this if they're done well. And yeah, and then we'll get fresh faces over there, and it'll be different, but it's something different but the same. You know, it'll be new life breathed into and everything. So we'll see. So I'm going to end with what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below because I'm really curious what the average con goer, uh, comic book fan thinks about all this. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below. And while you're here, if you haven't already, can you smash the like button, leave a like on this video. It'll really help. And if you're watching this and you're not a subscriber, please click the subscribe button. Click the bell for notifications because we go live every Sunday night and have some great conversations. And we put out a video every day during the week. So you don't want to miss any of that if you're enjoying this content. So, yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think. And thanks for watching. So, until next time, as always, don't let your cape get caught in the